Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Maybe the facility you manage could establish new revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Cart King International can be the answer to your needs. Cart King is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile coffee, food, and retail carts and kiosks. Cart King has been working with clients and corporations across North America for 20 years, providing innovative designs, custom manufacturing, and timely delivery. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on our website. Please visit us today at www.cart-king.com or just call us at 1-877-986-7771 and get your sales rolling.
If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law. PureSoapFlakes.com, 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with Pure Soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. They have a little promotion going on. Contact them to order some soap. Mention the Opperman Report. You're going to get a free gift. They're going to send a little extra soap, travel size, soap bars and laundry soap, cleaning soap flakes. I've been using that stuff all day long today. Great stuff. Order today at puresoapflakes.com or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild. The Opperman Report is brought to you by Aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an Aquadam can do the job. An Aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An Aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An Aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com, or you could just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon. We've got an Opperman Report Patreon where we put up 8 hours of new content every month. But our archives are always free. All the shows you hear Monday to Friday, AM/FM radio, you can catch them on Spreaker. Spreaker.com. And you can go there, sign up for free, get an email notification anytime we put up new content. And there's a chat room, too. You can keep in contact with other guests. I have with us today Dr. Breanne Fahs, F-A-H-S. Her website is Breanne, B-R-E-A-N-N-E, F-A-H-S.com. And she's written a couple of books about feminism. Now, the new one is called Burn It Down, Feminist Manifestos for the Revolution. And the one we're going to be more focusing on today is the story of Valerie Solanas, the defiant life of the woman who wrote Scum and shot Andy Warhol. They made a movie about this woman, too. Fascinating story. Dr. Fahs, are you there?
Yes, hi.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us about yourself. Who is Professor Breanne Fahs?
I'm a professor of women and gender studies at Arizona State University, and I mostly study radical feminism, women's sexuality, and what I call critical embodiment, as well as political activism. So those are kind of my areas of research, and Valerie Solanas is kind of right in the middle of those. I'm also a practicing clinical psychologist, so that also kind of, helps me to have an extra interest in Valerie Solanas at that fusion between, writing and madness and her influence on the women's movement and a whole bunch of other themes. So yeah, that's my short story anyway.
Now, for people who aren't familiar with this story, who was Valerie Solanas?
So Valerie Solanas is most widely known for shooting Andy Warhol. This was, a pretty widely publicized event that happened just before Bobby Kennedy was shot. And so a lot of people kind of vaguely heard about it, but then the story was buried, obviously, when Bobby Kennedy was shot. But she, in June of 1968, shot Andy Warhol. She didn't end up killing him, obviously, but he had, really serious injuries from it and was hospitalized for a long time. And, kind of his life changed course after that. But in addition to shooting Andy Warhol, she wrote a very widely published and reprinted and well-known manifesto called the Scum Manifesto. And this is a document that, many scholars sort of hold up as an ideal manifesto, right? One that kind of has all of the features of just a lot of raw anger and absurdity and linguistic reversals and all, it's a really absurd and wild document that some people sort of see as the embodiment of madness. But the basic premise of the Scum Manifesto, she's writing it in the mid to late 60s, right at the height of, when Freudian psychoanalysis is, being sort of widely circulated in New York City, and, women are going to therapy and their husbands are talking to their psychiatrists, after the sessions and stuff like this. So she was very interested in this idea of the way that Freud had sort of been framing penis envy and the way that had been circulating in, all kinds of ways at the time. And so the manifesto is really designed as a kind of dramatic reversal. So a lot of it is very, very, very anti-men, but it's also playing with these reversals of things like, instead of thinking about penis envy, she sort of thinks about the opposite of that. And so there's, the manifesto is really a reaction to that late 1960s moment that you write kind of before the beginnings of the women's movement, but when that height of anger is brewing.
That's right. Just think how different things were back then. Like you said, if a woman went to a psychiatrist, her husband could go in there after and say, well, what did she tell you? What did my wife tell you?
I know she on the phone about it.
Right.
There's no privacy. I know.
Or if a woman wanted to...
I mean, I think people forget how strange that period of time was for women. I mean, just the expectations of, very, very conventional gender roles. Want ads were segregated according to gender, right? So there were jobs for men,
right,
which were plentiful, and then jobs for women, which were mostly, secretarial work and things like that. Women were expected to be, to really, they didn't have their own credit cards outside of their husbands. They couldn't fly in business class without men. This is a really weird period of time for women. And I think, the Scum Manifesto really is a reaction to that moment, too.
And just think, too, even up until the 80s, they would have ads for women, especially on Wall Street, a vivacious personality, bubbly young lady, attractive appearance, you know? Yeah, this was just how it was, man, you know?
Yeah, and this is like before domestic violence shelters.
Right.
You know, this is like a period where I don't think people often can conjure it, especially for people in younger cohorts, just sort of how regressive and how conservative this moment was for gender. And you're right, I mean, like this notion of someone like Valerie Solanas, you know, who we still don't even really know whether she identified as a lesbian, as bisexual, as heterosexual. She had long-term relationships with men, but then was very outraged when someone would call her a lesbian. But then, of course, she was, and then would sort of claim that in other times. I mean, we don't know, but she definitely did not fit into 1960s gender roles. You know, she had real short hair, kind of brash, very, very intelligent, very ambitious, you know, and that there really wasn't an opening for someone like Valerie to succeed. You know, she went to graduate school and they kept telling her, well, we don't give fellowships to women because women are supposed to just get married, so they're a waste of our money, you know, and she had no intention, obviously, of getting married or of following that path, but she also, you know, she went the more conventional route of trying to get, you know, more and more education, and just found herself frustrated as this very bright and ambitious woman.
I know that she had an experience in her life of early childhood sexual abuse, but what else do you think molded her? Who inspired her? Who were the philosophers and the great thinkers who she admired?
I mean, she was a reader, and you see in lots of little ways, you know, when I was working on the biography, that she admired, you know, the early suffrage movement. She was interested in constitutional law. She wrote all these letters to famous constitutional lawyers, you know, asking about the Equal Rights Amendment. I mean, so before she went way sort of outside the mainstream avenues for change, you could see her struggling about wanting to understand and kind of fight and advocate for those more like within system modes of change. And then again, coming up against these really frustrating responses, especially about the sort of legal basis for gender equity. You know, at the time, there were plenty of lawyers, really prominent, famous ones, who were basically just arguing that there wasn't a legal basis for that. You know, and I think for someone like Valerie, who, you know, grew up with her mother and her sister, and was, you know, I think very early on sort of aware of like women's potential power and things like that, there's, you know, those influences really matter too. And then, of course, you know, getting an education. So she goes to the University of Maryland and gets a college degree. But the way that she was able to pay for that, which is really quite a tragic story, is that she was pregnant at age 15, and she basically gave the baby up for adoption in exchange for them paying her college tuition. So, you know, even like these sort of, you know, the choices that people had back then in terms of how do you like make opportunity for yourself if you don't have a lot of money, if you come from a family, you know, with like a single mom who's kind of struggling financially, how do you get an education? Well, that was the avenue that she had. So I think there's a lot of these moments with her where you see, you know, influences not just of, you know, prominent thinkers and different sorts of, you know, tensions of the time, but also just, you know, what are the options available to women who get pregnant at age 15 or who are dealing with sexual abuse from a really young age, or, you know, who are really bright and ambitious, but they don't fit in, and they certainly don't look like all the other women wearing strings of pearls and, you know, with perfect long hair. I mean, she just didn't quite fit into her time and place, you know. It always makes me wonder if she had been born a little bit later, would that have been easier for her? You know, she just stuck out like a sore thumb. And if you see these images of her with her classmates, it almost just, it kind of like hurts my heart to see how much she just is so not a character that fits into that cultural moment, you know? So I think in a lot of ways you can see her struggling through, you know, the 50s and 60s were really not especially the early 60s, were not a really, you know, welcoming time for iconoclastic, you know, out lesbian, you know, just really, you know, again, bright women. Like there wasn't a lot of receptor points, I guess, for that. And I think I really see that as a big influence in her later work, where, you know, she's sort of always struggling to get by, but having to make certain sacrifices that are compromising at times, you know? And
what about her personal relationships? Did she have friends and socialize?
I mean, she had an interesting kind of social world. She basically, when I was writing the book, I was so surprised in some ways by how many of these very, very close friends I would interview, and they would speak about her with such affection and just absolute devotion. So she didn't have many friends, but the friends that she had were very, very devoted to her. And she, I don't know, I mean, I think later, like in the late 70s, after she shoots Andy Warhol, is hospitalized, and then gets out of the hospital, she was able to develop a little bit more kind of, I don't know if we would say healthy, but something approaching close or more bonded relationships with people. But prior to that, it was pretty tough. I mean, there's just, there's like evidence of so much conflict, one thing after another. She gets angry at a girl in college and pees in her orange juice and puts it back in the fridge. Stuff like that. You just think like, when she's a little girl, she punches a nun. I mean, this kind of stuff, this is like, plagues her throughout her life. So it's certainly she's not a character that's always easy to sympathize with. I mean, she also, though, was very keen on defending girls from boys, at school, like when she was really young, especially, throwing rocks at them and standing up for her sister. And, there's all these moments where you can see, like, the little Firebrand Valerie sort of developing into, who she would later be. But, you also see that when, she really did have diagnosed paranoid schizophrenia, which sometimes is a little bit more under control than other times. But when that was out of control, I mean, you can imagine the sort of shattering impact that has on your social life and your social world when you're very paranoid and you really don't know who to trust. And that happened a lot, where she would get close to someone and then become convinced that they were conspiring against her. And that's a really normal thing that happens with paranoid schizophrenia, where people, they lose their sense of who might be in their corner and who isn't. And even people that truly are in your corner, they can't always believe it, right? And so she had all these radical feminists who had like sort of rushed to her aid, and she developed friendships with them, but then would sort of turn on them. And I think that's one of the great tragedies in some ways of this particular mental illness is.
Did I lose you?
That, and so that was a real struggle for her up until the moment that she died, really.
Now, the Scum Manifesto, what would we find in the Scum Manifesto? By the way, did she write the Scum Manifesto before or after the Warhol shooting?
Oh, she wrote it before. So she writes the manifesto in 1966 and 1967. Then in 1967 goes and self-publishes it all over New York. So she makes mimeographed copies, which for those of you who don't know what mimeographs are, it's sort of like a early version of a Xerox machine that you kind of hand crank. So she makes all these mimeograph copies. She sells them to local bookstores. She makes sure to tell them to charge men $2 and women $1 for the Scum Manifesto, which I always thought was kind of funny. I mean, and that was forever that she did that. And then, after that, the manifesto gets some kind of like underground attention. So no mainstream attention or anything, but it falls into various hands, including this publisher named Maurice Gerodius, who he was quite famous for publishing the book Lolita, or the American version of Lolita, among many other things, Naked Lunch. So he had this. He was also, quite an iconoclastic sort of sleazy character who was looking for things that would be very provocative. And he comes across the Scum Manifesto and asks Valerie to sign over rights to it, and that he promises to publish it. But later we find out that he really had no intention of publishing that document until Valerie shot Andy Warhol, which then was this, big media event, and Maurice Gerodius then was like, okay, we're going to publish this as soon as possible and capitalize on all this media attention. So again, it kind of raises this terrible dilemma where, especially again back to these like limited options for women. But basically, we know that Maurice Gerodius would never have published the manifesto if Valerie Solanas hadn't shot Andy Warhol. And yet Valerie Solanas shooting Andy Warhol means that that's the thing that she's most well known for. People mostly know her as the woman who shot Andy Warhol, not the woman who wrote Scum Manifesto, right? So it's like this terrible dilemma of, that happens, I think, to actually quite a few women artists where, unless there's some other thing that happens biographically or they get certain kinds of media attention or something, their work really falls into obscurity. And so, there is a kind of funny, like, trajectory of her writing the STEM manifesto, being really like passionate about, distributing it and getting it out in the world. She, obviously shows it to Andy Warhol, and along with another play that she wrote. And Andy Warhol promised to produce the play, and then also like tosses the play into a trunk. We never hear from it again until the year 2000, long after his and Valerie's death, when it's discovered in the bottom of one of his associates' trunk. So, Valerie's fears that Warhol just sort of tossed the manifesto and didn't care, that turned out to be true, and that was her best copy of sorry, I can't say the name of the play because the play has a profane name, so for radio. But anyway, so this play gets tossed into a trunk and never to be heard from again. So we have this thing where Valerie's struggling as a writer. She's trying to get this attention. Maurice Gerodius is offering her money. Andy Warhol is promising to produce it, and then it all explodes with the shooting. But I think ironically, the shooting then propels the Scum Manifesto into the public eye more than it ever would have been.
Did you look into the possibility that these two were acting as gatekeepers to suppress her work?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any evidence of that. But I think she was really, really paranoid about the contract that Gerodius gave her, because and it still is a kind of standard thing where when you sign a book contract, sometimes the press will say, we also want to have first review rights of your next several works, right? So basically that same press gets your next several works unless they don't want them, and then you can go shop them around to another press. So some presses still offer. I don't think it's quite as common now, but it does happen. But at the time, it happened all the time, right? So if you published a book with, Olympia Press, which was Gerodius's press, then Olympia Press would get review rights for your next several works. So Valerie became very paranoid that she realized only after the fact that she had sort of signed away not only the rights to Scum Manifesto, but also to whatever she wrote next, and then felt like that was kind of a con job. Mm-hmm. And that, again, you also have to remember, you have someone who's very paranoid, because of her mental illness, but also she doesn't have anyone to really like bounce this off of. It's not like she just has a lawyer friend standing around who she can say, is this normal, or what kind of contract should I be asking for? I mean, there's no one in her circle who can kind of advocate for her. So, I think in some ways we can sort of imagine that for someone like Valerie, who really does feel very protective over her work, that would have been a really confusing and difficult thing to navigate, right? To deal with signing book contracts and worrying that she's now signed away the rights to her next several pieces.
Yeah, especially when it's such controversial material to begin with. You had a bullseye on yourself to begin walking in the door. Now,
right.
The Scum Manifesto is considered visionary, right? Like, she was predicting artificial insemination. She wanted a world without men. Am I correct?
Yeah, right. So it's sort of it's like a document it's outrageous, right? In the very first sentence, she calls for the elimination of men, the elimination of money, an overthrow of the government in the first sentence, right? So it's quite a wild sort of document. But yeah, the whole document is really trying to imagine, what would it be like if men were no longer in charge? Obviously, if systematically there's like certain sections where she's advocating for men to be killed, how do we sort of let the world be taken over by women, and what would that look like, right? So she's taking down things like the money system, great art, literature, sexuality, and she has like different sections where she's kind of, picking off theme by theme what it would look like to have a world run by women, which at the time, of course, was even more unthinkable than it is now.
Oh yeah, there weren't even like women mayors or women governors back in those days. Now,
right.
And you were telling me off the air that there's a lot of debate whether this was satirical or whether she really meant it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most interesting debates, I think, is, sometimes when you read, and for those of you, for listeners who haven't ever read the Scum Manifesto, it is definitely worth just like, doing a quick Google search for it, or you can obviously buy a book version, but it's really, really, really an electric text, right? So when you read it, a lot of people feel very alarmed by it. Some people just find themselves laughing. Some people feel like it's really cathartic. There's like aspects where it's kind of an outlet for your own anger, whatever, sort of anger. Some people find it sort of startling or energy producing. There's some people just hate it and find it really disturbing. I mean, there's a lot of really strong reactions, like with many manifestos that you have when reading it. But the big thing that comes up immediately, usually after that first response, is sort of, is this real? Does she mean this? Is she saying this in a way where this is like somebody who genuinely does want to go eliminate all men? Or is this something where it's like a literary device or, kind of form of satire to use, hyperbole or extremes to kind of help us to think about, the ways in which women are treated, right? So it wouldn't be uncommon for people to speak about, in very misogynistic ways, for example, in these ways. Like, and we see that even now with like incels and, obviously even like the Trump presidency and everything else, right? It's just full of misogyny is like the norm, right? And so she's kind of, is this a literary device? Is it satire? Is she like doing, is it sort of a Jonathan Swift mode kind of thing? Or is this something where she's genuinely 100% dead serious? And I've been asked that, many, many times when I've interviewed in the past about her. And my response is always the same, which I think it might be both at the same time, right? So she herself has called the Scum Manifesto a literary device in an interview that she did in the 70s, but she also said that she's completely serious. So in terms of what she's herself said, she said both, right? And I think it might be both, where she's serious and she knows that this is kind of a way of using satire to make a point, right? So I think for listeners, it's really important that you kind of have your own reaction to it, because it does, some people just, really react drastically differently to this text from each other. And it's interesting to see kind of your own reaction. For me, I found that the first time I read it, it felt like almost like the best versions of comedy, right? Where you kind of, I don't know, there was like a lot of laughter and kind of just like, wow, this is so absurd and extreme, but kind of pleasurable to read, but in like a weird, it's hard to describe, but you need to have your own reaction to it, I think, to see. Have you read it yourself? I don't know.
Years and years and years and years and years ago, back in the 70s, back in New York City. So, I was on the Lower East Side with the Yippies, so yeah, I was out there myself. Now, real quick though, are there any interviews available with Solanas, like on YouTube?
No, I mean, there's some newspaper articles that transcribe short interviews with her, so that's an interesting thing to see. And then there's now recently on YouTube, there's some really brief footage of her being arrested in Times Square after she shot Andy Warhol. And all she is sort of like shouting a couple of things at reporters, saying things like, read my manifesto and it will tell you what I am, or, kind of just one line at the press. So there's stuff like that. And then we have an audio recording of her last conversation that's known with one of the Warhol superstars, Ultraviolet. Ultraviolet tracked her down in San Francisco and managed to tape record this conversation where, Valerie's asking about copyright to the Scum Manifesto. And Ultraviolet says, did you know that Andy Warhol died? And Valerie didn't know that. And then, sort of asked about that. So that's kind of like the longest recorded conversation that we have. And then, of course, Valerie was in a couple of Andy Warhol's movies, one of which is called I, a Man. And so in I, a Man, there's a couple of extended scenes with Valerie where, she's acting, so it's not her performing as herself, but it's pretty close to her performing as herself because, she's sort of joking around about this guy walking into an apartment building and commenting on his, I can't say it on the radio, and things like that. So, there's that we do have some sense of her cadence and how she talked and, a little bit of her conversation style. And of course, lots of letters. But there's not like really extended interviews. There is one, actually, there's another one I just realized that I had kind of a lot of fun listening to because it's so bizarre. Andy Warhol was very well known for recording everything. So, for people who are familiar with Warhol, you'll know that he recorded everything. He kept these long, mundane video and audio recordings of all sorts of things that went on in the factory and with his, entourage and things like this. And so there's these extended recordings of Valerie talking to Andy Warhol where, she's sort of hot-headed and pressured speech and, really like lively. And then, Warhol sort of sounds like he's sort of almost dead, in that really distant sort of floating and on top of the air kind of way. And so Valerie's like, saying things like, you need to be the head of the men's auxiliary of scum, and, you have a responsibility to da-da-da-da-da. And he's like, oh, Valerie, he has this kind of druggy sort of drifty way. And these conversations it just shows you how the two of them are just such an odd pairing, where she's just all hot-bloodedness and he's cold and distant, floating in the air, cerebral, and she's trying to sort of get him to come around and saying things that she'll like leave a copy of Scum Manifesto under his pillow at night, and he doesn't take the bait. He's sort of just like kind of he sort of saw her as this character that was kind of acting according to her nature. I think that's maybe one of the great strengths of Warhol, is that he saw the people around him as having the fundamental right to their own style, their own way of being in the world. And he even extended this to Valerie after she shot him, which I find just crazy in some ways. That like you have this woman who shoots you, and he basically never presses charges and tells the police later, well, she was acting according to her nature. How can I be mad at her? I mean, that's a pretty extreme response to someone shooting you. Especially when, he did almost die, and he was terribly afraid of her and afraid of being shot again by others. But he didn't feel that she was acting in a way that was discordant with her nature. I just think that's a really funny reaction. And so the two of them had this bizarre sort of dynamic, for years, where she would write him letters and, he would kind of respond, and she would tell him like, different threats and call him the Great Toad and all these various things, and he would just sort of like, he was just kind of amused by her. He didn't relate to her in a way that seems like a normal way that someone would relate to someone who shot them anyway.
That is incredibly I got to do a whole show one day about Warhol. I had no idea that he didn't press charges. I just assumed he did. But it's also interesting too, because the whole factory, like, he only paid her $25 to do that film, right?
It's totally ridiculous. And he notoriously never paid his actors. I mean, even it's like he was so bad with the women in the factory. I think people don't realize this, but like the superstars were mostly these wealthy heiresses, so he could get away with promising them all sorts of things and never delivering. And he did that all the time, where he would surround himself with working class men who really, were kind of coming up from families where they really couldn't be out and gay, for example, and these sort of like scrappy working class men, and then these wealthy heiress women, right? That was like his circle. And so he got away with not paying the women in films pretty much all the time. But he also, imagine Valerie strolling into that, right, where the other women are these wealthy heiresses, and how would she possibly like fit in with that culture, and so like it really didn't go well for her with the factory. Like the Warhol factory people obviously had like a deep distaste for her, but Warhol kind of took a liking to her in certain ways, even though he exploited her. He would take some of her lines that she said to him and use them in other movies, which of course infuriated her. Or he would listen to her tone and her cadence and try to like get people to mimic it in his films. He thought she was very, sort of authentic and interesting and unique, which she was. And so I think, their relationship, I think, is just one of the weirdest and that I've ever come across in history. Just kind of like these people that they had a weird affection and a kind of friendship maybe, but also they couldn't be more opposite. And the fact that she chose Andy Warhol as the symbol of patriarchy and masculinity and men is also absurd. I mean, Andy Warhol is like kind of vaguely asexual, kind of queer, not particularly macho, kind of, he's just not the symbol of that, right, in like the classic sense. And so it just feels strange when you look at, well, why would he be sort of filling this role, and so there's lots of question marks around that. It's fascinating.
It's such a fascinating topic, and you never hear this discussed at all. Good time to take a commercial break. We're with Dr. Breanne Fahs, F-A-H-S. You can find her at BreanneFahs.com. We're talking about Valerie Solanas, the defiant life of the woman who wrote Scum and shot Andy Warhol. You lay it out right there in the title. But we're also going to be talking about your other book, too, Burn It Down, Feminist Manifestos for the Revolution. We'll be right back with more of Breanne Fahs right after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors.
Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Maybe the facility you manage could establish new revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Cart King International can be the answer to your needs. Cart King is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile coffee, food, and retail carts and kiosks. Cart King has been working with clients and corporations across North America for 20 years, providing innovative designs, custom manufacturing, and timely delivery. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on our website. Please visit us today at www.cart-king.com or just call us at 1-877-986-7771 and get your sales rolling.
Thank you so much for listening to the Opperman Report. I want to welcome all our new listeners at WWPR 1490 AM in the Tampa Bay area. We're brand new down here. We're getting a nice warm welcome. We have great advertising opportunities for local sponsors, local businesses, but also international websites and international companies too on our other stations in California, Nevada, Utah, and on the internet worldwide. But down here in Tampa Bay, Florida, we have some great opportunities for you to come in and get very, very affordable advertising rates. Get a hold of me at oppermanreport@gmail.com and we'll cut you a good deal. PureSoapFlakes.com, 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with Pure Soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. They have a little promotion going on. Contact them to order some soap. Mention the Opperman Report. You're going to get a free gift. They're going to send a little extra soap, travel size, soap bars and laundry soap, cleaning soap flakes. I've been using that stuff all day long today. Great stuff. Order today at puresoapflakes.com or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild. The Opperman Report is brought to you by Aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an Aquadam can do the job. An Aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An Aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An Aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We're talking to Dr. Breanne Fahs, F-A-H-S, and you can find her at breannefahs.com. We're talking about her books, Valerie Solanas, The Defiant Life of the Woman Who Wrote Scum and Shot Andy Warhol. And also another book she wrote too is Burn It Down, The Feminist Manifesto for the Revolution. Now, Dr. Fahs, the day of the shooting, now, was this something premeditated? Like she was on the hunt for Andy Warhol for a couple of days, or she just woke up that day and decided to do it, or she, a spur of the moment, just pulled out a gun?
I mean, it's pretty clear that she was sort of fuming and had this boiling rage that had been happening for several days, but it was fairly premeditated. I mean, she went and talked to a friend. We know that she went and talked to one of her good friends, who I later interviewed, about how do I get a gun, how do you shoot someone, like really asking, like, how do you shoot someone? She really didn't know. And then, of course, later, when she didn't kill Warhol, and, maybe 5-6 years later, she was doing an interview where they asked her, like, do you have any regrets about shooting him? And she said something snarky like, my only regret is that I didn't do target practice, something like I regret that I missed, like, oh God. So, she really, I think this was a pretty premeditated thing. Now, of course, Marie Herodias circulated a rumor that she really wanted to kill him first, and when she couldn't find him, she went to shoot Andy Warhol, but we don't really see any evidence of that. That was probably just a publicity stunt. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the morning of the shooting, it was kind of a wild story, actually, because she was wandering around New York City, going to various playhouses, trying to meet with people about producing her play. So, like, before she shoots Andy Warhol, she goes into, near Times Square to a couple of these different theaters and is, like, asking around for people that, that she knows about to ask if they will be willing to produce her play. This is kind of a bizarre timeline if you think about that. Then she goes and meets with a woman named Margot Fiden, again, who she sees as having these various connections to the world of, Broadway plays and things. Fiden had been an actress and then, later, kind of was rising in power in that sort of world. And they have this long conversation, but she's doing it like at gunpoint, right? So she waits for Margot Fiden, has a gun, brings the gun into Margot Fiden's apartment. She's totally alarmed. She tells Fiden that she's going to go shoot Warhol. Here's another wonderful anecdote about sexism, right? She tells Fiden, I'm going to go shoot Andy Warhol now. Fiden then calls the police, and they don't believe her, right? Wow. So she's like, I just have this woman here. Her name's Valerie Solanas. She says she's going to go and shoot Andy Warhol right now, and they think it's a prank call, so they hang up. She calls back to the police department and says, no, this is not a prank call. Valerie Solanas is just in my apartment, told me she's going to go shoot him right now. You need to do something. Andy Warhol is going to be shot, and they think it's a prank call again and hang up. She calls back a third time, and they basically tell her, like, you're a stupid, silly woman making up stories, and then hang up again. So, there was this moment where Valerie made her intentions very clear to someone who then had the wherewithal to call police, and then the police just dismissed her as, silly and stupid and making up stories. And so,
is your husband there? Put your husband on the phone right now.
Right. Yeah. So, and then, of course, sure enough, like 2 hours later, Valerie, strolls into the factory. It was premeditated enough where she's waiting outside for him to come back. So she rides up the elevator with Warhol and of his associates. And then, they go into the factory and she pulls the gun on Warhol. She shoots him. She shoots two other men in the factory. And, the gun jammed, or she probably have kept going. And then, one of the guys is sort of, who's shot is pleading with her, like, just go, Valerie, just leave. Go here. There's the elevator. Take it. And then she, takes the elevator down, wanders around New York City for a while, and eventually turns herself in in Times Square to a traffic cop and basically says, I shot Andy Warhol, you should take me in. And that's kind of, the short version of that story, which is it's a pretty gruesome event, and she was just, she was wearing like weird clothing, she had these like huge heavy sweaters and long jackets on. It was like the middle of, or the early part of June, this is like weird. She was carrying around like either a tampon or a pad with her. She had and another gun in a paper bag that she like leaves on the desk of Warhol, I think probably by accident. It was kind of a weird set of circumstances, but at least for me, when I read and when I wrote about it, it just seems like, it's like one of those things where violence in theory versus violence in practice, you can just see that there was like a massive shift, I think, in her during that event, but also just in the story, right? Like Valerie's a much more sympathetic and in some ways much more interesting character before she actually engages in actual violence, and at least for me, that's my take as a biographer. I just felt like the actual event of shooting someone and like watching them bleed out all over the place, I don't think that really went all that well for her. I think she realized that she lost so much of her credibility as an artist by becoming, a violent criminal. I think that it really did diminish her. And that's a sort of, I don't know, I think in this moment right now when there's so much talk of, politically motivated violence in the air and things like that, you just think, well, like in theory, that's one thing, right? in the abstract sense, the notion of people using violence as a tool to fight back against their oppressors is one thing, but in practice, that's quite a different thing. It's more gruesome and sort of sad, and in some ways, again, like she had such sort of potential as an artist, I think, and really the Scum Manifesto is an absolutely incredible document, regardless of whether you like its content. It's an incredible document. I mean, every manifesto scholar I've ever known sort of holds it up as this sort of epitome of what manifestos could be, right? That they're just startling and intense, and you read them and you feel just absolutely alive when you read them, and you feel like it's a distillation of rage that doesn't have an expression otherwise, and violence isn't that way. It doesn't come across in as a heroic thing. It doesn't come across as something where it's not an expression of rage that translates in the same way. Her manifesto is so much more impactful and powerful, I think, as that than the act of shooting Warhol was. And so, yeah, in some ways it's a sad story that becomes the story that dominates her life, because she had such a more interesting life than that event,
And she didn't wind up doing a lot of time, 3 years, 5 years, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, she really, because he never pressed charges, and because she was ruled to be mentally ill, she hopped around between different mental hospitals. She would escape from them, which is another thing I don't think people often think enough about, is she escaped from Bellevue. I mean, who does that? No one gets out of there. Or Mattawan, or, she got out of these places, which is really pretty wild. So, yeah, she went from mental hospital to mental hospital to mental hospital. And of course, those were god awful at the time. I mean, it's hard to even overstate that. They were doing all kinds of crazy stuff. At Bellevue, they were doing, for example, experimental hysterectomies on the inmates, or they're really not inmates, they're patients, really. So on their patients, right, they were like, oh, well, this is a population that we can exploit. And they would just, do experimental reproductive procedures. And Valerie was one of them. She had her uterus removed experimentally and not with her consent, and this really, planted the seed of even more paranoia, as you could imagine, where for years after that surgery, she became convinced that, her parents' schizophrenia had gotten much worse, and she became convinced that someone had implanted a device in her uterus that was being tracked by the mob, and this was a really, really strong paranoia that lasted for almost a decade. But it doesn't come from nowhere, all paranoias, they're based in reality. There really was an exploitative thing that happened to her uterus, and there really was something that would happen against her will. It just wasn't a uterine transmitter being implanted by the mob. It was, an institution that thought that the bodies of patients in Bellevue were perfectly fine to operate on against their will. So it also is one of those moments where Valerie's story reminds us that madness isn't divorced from truth. Madness overlaps with truth, and people's paranoia often are rooted deeply in something that is true.
We only got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything about Valerie Solanas I haven't asked you want the audience to know?
Oh, well, I mean, I think one of the things that her story sometimes fails to communicate, unless you read the biography or read some of her letters and stuff, is just how profoundly funny she was, too. I mean, she used humor throughout her life always, and all of her writings are really funny. They're laced with things I think are quite funny and playful, and, she has the kind of humor that now I think we're starting to recognize as profound. If you like, Hannah Gadsby and Chris Rock and, Ali Wong and those kind of comedians, who really sort of speak the truth about things in a pretty edgy way, but it's funny because we see the aspects of truth in those. I think Valerie was very much that way too, and she had a very kind of New York sensibility that she comes there and really finds this bohemian sort of counterculture that she could sort of thrive for a time. And there's these periods of her life where she thrives that also reminds me that humor is one way that we survive terrible things, right? But also that when we figure out how to not always be swimming upstream so much, when you find your people or your tribe, or she could finally be in this place where she could sort of have her gender identity and her sexual identity just accepted and out in the open and not, sort of squeezed all the time. I think it really did help her as an artist. So for me, like when I look at her story, there's many, many takeaways, but that's one of them. And then, the other thing I think that I would want to sort of emphasize is that, for someone like Valerie, like the Scum Manifesto at its core is really arguing that women need to value their relationships with each other. Ultimately that's what she's saying, right? She has these long critiques in there of men, of course, but also of women who cater to men over women, right? Or who she calls daddy's girls. So women who are like very, authority, oriented towards authority figures, oriented towards pleasing others. And in Valerie's sort of ideal world, she's kind of creating this other model, right? Where there's like, women who are self-sufficient, who value their friendships with other women over anything else, who have their own money and their own sort of style and panache. And, I don't know if viewers have seen or listeners have seen Broad City, but when I saw Broad City for the first time, it was like kind of absurd comedy, but it really sort of felt a little bit like that kind of thing that Valerie's thinking of, where, we really don't do a good job at imagining something else with regard to gender, or imagining like what else women could accomplish or be or become if they weren't oriented towards pleasing men and authority figures, right? And so I think there's a little bit of a cautionary tale like built into the Scum Manifesto that sometimes gets obscured. So that really is another takeaway. And I also think, as a kind of final thought, I think sometimes with Scum Manifesto there's such an emphasis on thinking of it as a document that's like criticizing, men and patriarchy and that sort of stuff. But it's also a document of class-based rage. It really is, somebody from the gutter struggling to survive, sort of railing and lashing out against, power on a class level too. And I think right now we need that more than ever. We need models of how to not just constantly, cater to this notion of, not just capitalism, but just kind of the ways in which like the wealthy just don't get criticized enough, right? And so I love this sort of sentiment of the Scum Manifesto being this document of like lashing out from the gutter and like valuing a voice of, Valerie was homeless for much of her life. She worked as a prostitute for many years. She understood what it was like to like struggle to get by. And those voices, we don't publish those voices nearly enough. We don't listen to those voices. And there's an incredible amount of rage, I think, that is stirring and brewing sometimes in terms of social class. And I love this document as a kind of early moment of thinking about class-based rage. And we need to look for that more, and we need to value it because, I think especially right now, it's just, we must think about those things together, that like both, women's rage against men is a very valid thing, but also, class-based rage, right? We're like people in the gutter, like speaking from the gutter for people in the gutter. She calls it that. That's I think one of her phrases. So, I mean, she dedicates the Scum Manifesto, these are her words, to whores, dykes, criminals, and homicidal maniacs, right? So that, and I think that means something. I find that in some ways, like almost kind of weirdly moving. It's like a claiming of space for both the writer and the audience. That's not about wealth and privilege and fame. It's about this other thing, and I think that's really kind of special.
I got to tell you, I hope these kids over there at the Arizona State University appreciate how lucky they are to have a professor like Breanne Fahs teaching a class over. This is great stuff. I would love to have you come back and tell us some more about Burn It Down, Feminist Manifesto for the Revolution. Any book that starts with Burn It Down has a place on the Opperman Report, I'll tell you that, okay? It has a place for my audience whatsoever. So I definitely am going to beg you to come back. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Breanne Fahs, FAHS.com. The two books are Burn It Down, Feminist Manifestos for the Revolution, and the book we've been talking about today, and the story is Valerie Solanas, The Defiant Life of the Woman Who Wrote Scum and Shot Andy Warhol. Breanne, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed this. I'm going to shoot you an email after this about coming back, okay?
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. Good night. And now a word from our sponsors. OppermanReport.com. Hey, do you like what you're hearing? Do you like the work that you see us doing here at Opperman Report? You can support that work by becoming a member at OppermanReport.com. And as you have access to over 200 exclusive shows and interviews that you can't find on YouTube or Spreaker or iHeart or iTunes or KYAH. You can't find them anywhere else online, exclusive to our member sections, to our members. Also, too, there's images, videos, documents, court docs. And don't forget, you can hear your ad played here on the Opperman Report, reach hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people on a daily basis because the show is repeated every day all over the world. Contact me at oppermanreport@gmail.com and I'll give you a good deal on advertising rates.
Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Maybe the facility you manage could establish new revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Cart King International can be the answer to your needs. Cart King is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile coffee, food, and retail carts and kiosks. Cart King has been working with clients and corporations across North America for 20 years, providing innovative designs, custom manufacturing, and timely delivery. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on our website. Please visit us today at www.cart-king.com or just call us at 1-877-986-7771 and get your sales rolling.
The Opperman Report is brought to you by Aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an Aquadam can do the job. An Aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An Aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An Aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119.
Are you ready to change your life, but don't know how to start? Is your stress and worries keeping you awake at night? Have you been battling grief, anxiety, or depression all alone? Have you lost touch with your own sense of being or spirituality? Soul Free Therapies offers professional and affordable live video streaming counseling and coaching services from the comfort of your own home. Sessions offered in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Go to our website at www.soul-free.com and book your first session today.
If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents, they handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law. PureSoapFlakes.com. 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with Pure Soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. They have a little promotion going on. Contact them to order some soap. Mention the Opperman Report. You're going to get a free gift. They're going to send a little extra soap, travel size, soap bars and laundry soap, cleaning soap flakes. I've been using that stuff all day long today. Great stuff. Order today at puresoapflakes.com or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild.